The first time I saw them, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was late. Too late for anyone to be out, especially in the woods behind my uncle's house. But there they were, just standing there, barely visible between the trees, their bodies too still to be natural. I had been staying with Uncle Rick for the summer, sent off by my parents who thought some fresh air and getting away from the internet would do me good. His house was out in the middle of nowhere, perched on the edge of a forest that stretched for miles. No neighbors, no streetlights, just darkness swallowing everything whole as soon as the sun went down. I was on the back porch that night listening to the cicadas hum their eerie song when I noticed them. At first, I thought they were trees, tall, thin figures standing in the shadows. But something about them was off. They weren't moving with the wind. They weren't shifting in the darkness, like the rest of the forest. They were just watching. A shiver ran down my spine. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe they were just trees. Maybe the night was playing tricks on me. Then one of them took a step forward. I nearly fell backward, scrambling to get inside. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and pressed my back against it, my heart hammering in my chest. Everything okay? I jumped at the sound of Uncle Rick's voice. He was standing in the hallway, a beer in one hand, his face half hidden in the dim light. I hesitated. Telling him I'd just seen tall, shadowy figures moving in the woods didn't seem like the best idea. I didn't want to sound crazy. Yeah, I lied. Just thought I saw something outside. His face darkened. He set his beer down on the counter and moved to the window, peering out into the backyard. He stood there for a long moment, his shoulders tense. "Did you see their faces?" he asked quietly. I felt the air leave my lungs. "What?" He turned to me, his face unreadable. "You need to go to bed. Now. Keep your window locked. Don't open it for anything. If you hear something outside, ignore it, no matter what it says." A chill ran through me. "Uncle Rick, what the hell is?" "Just listen to me," he snapped, his voice sharp and urgent. "Go. Now." I wanted to argue, but something in his eyes told me not to push it. So I nodded and headed upstairs, my skin crawling with unease. As I climbed into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I turned toward the window. The curtains were drawn, but I swore I could hear something. Soft tapping, like fingernails against the glass. I squeezed my eyes shut and forced myself to stay still. I didn't sleep that night. I woke up the next morning feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My head was heavy, my limbs sluggish, but I forced myself out of bed and into the kitchen, where Uncle Rick was already sitting at the table, sipping black coffee. His eyes were sunken, dark bags under them like he hadn't slept either. For a long moment, he didn't say anything, just stared down into his coffee, like it held some kind of answer. Then, without looking up, he asked, "Did you hear anything last night?" I hesitated. "Yeah, I think I heard tapping at my window." He nodded slowly, taking another sip before setting the mug down with a quiet clink. "Did you look?" I shook my head. "No." I remembered what you said. I kept my eyes shut. "Good," he said. "That's real good." I swallowed hard. "Uncle Rick, what the hell was out there?" His eyes met mine, and for the first time since I'd known him, my fun-loving, easygoing uncle looked scared. "You ever hear of the Hollow Ones?" I frowned. "No." "They aren't people," he said. "Not really. They look like people at first. They stand like M. They move like M. But they ain't. There's something else. Something old." He rubbed a hand over his face. "They only come around at night. They watch, they wait, and sometimes..." He stopped himself, shaking his head. I felt my stomach twist. "Sometimes what?" Uncle Rick let out a slow breath. "Sometimes they try to get inside." A chill ran up my spine. I thought of the tapping at my window, the way it had almost seemed deliberate. "Why?" I asked. He shook his head. "Nobody knows. Some say they steal faces, wear them like masks. Others say they don't have faces of their own, so they take ours. And some..." He trailed off, staring toward the back door, his fingers tightening around his coffee mug. "Some say they whisper to you, try to get you to come outside. And if you do," he turned back to me, "you don't come back." I swallowed hard. "You're messing with me." "I wish I was," he said. "You think I'd still be living in this goddamn house if I had a choice? But my dad left it to me, and if I sell it, I gotta tell people why. So he ran a hand through his hair. "I just deal with it." I felt like I was going to be sick. "So what do? We keep the windows covered. We don't answer the door at night. We don't talk to them. We don't look at them. And we sure as hell don't let them in." I nodded slowly, trying to process everything. It felt like a horror movie, like something that shouldn't be real. But I had seen them, and I'd heard the tapping. It was real, and I was trapped here with them. The next few days passed in a haze of paranoia. Every night, as soon as the sun dipped below the trees, Uncle Rick locked every door, checked every window, and shut every curtain. And every night, I could feel them outside. Sometimes, I would hear them pacing just beyond the house, their footsteps slow and deliberate. Other times, it was the whispering low, almost melodic, like voices carried by the wind. I couldn't make out the words, but they filled me with a deep, gnawing dread. Then, on the fourth night, something changed. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A knock. Not at my window this time. At the front door. 3 slow, rhythmic knocks. I sat up, my breath catching in my throat. My mind raced. Maybe it was a neighbor. Maybe it was some lost hiker looking for help. Maybe. And then I heard it. A voice. Soft, almost familiar. "Hey, it's me. Open up." I froze. It was my dad's voice. I hadn't seen my dad in weeks. He had dropped me off here and gone back home, miles away. There was no way he was at the front door. I clenched my jaw, squeezing my eyes shut. "It's okay," the voice continued, gentle, coaxing. "I just need to come inside for a second. Just let me in, kiddo." No. No, no, no. I gripped the edge of my blanket, my knuckles turning white. It wasn't him. It couldn't be him. A second voice joined in. My mom's this time. "Sweetheart, please. Just let us in." I couldn't breathe. The doorknob rattled. Uncle Rick's voice boomed from the hallway. "Get away from the door." The rattling stopped. Silence. I didn't move. I couldn't. After what felt like an eternity, Uncle Rick appeared in my doorway, his face pale. "They're trying to trick you," he said. "They know who we love, what we want." My whole body was shaking. What if I swallowed hard? What if it was really them? He shook his head. "It wasn't." "How do you know?" His eyes darkened. "Because my dad knocked on my door once. After he'd been dead for 10 years. My stomach dropped. I didn't sleep that night. And by the time the sun rose, I knew one thing for sure. I had to get the hell out of here. I waited until morning to talk to Uncle Rick about leaving. We sat at the kitchen table again, the sun creeping through the curtains, casting long, uneasy shadows on the walls. The house always felt safer in the daylight, but I knew better now. The hollow ones didn't just disappear when the sun came up. They were always there, watching, waiting. "I want to go home," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Uncle Rick sighed. "I figured. I mean it. This place isn't safe. I can't." I stopped, my throat tightening. "I can't deal with this." "I don't blame you," he admitted. "But it's not that simple." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He took a slow sip of his coffee, like he was stalling. Then he said, "They don't like it when people leave." A cold chill ran through me. "What?" "They let people come here, just fine. But leaving." He shook his head. "That's different." I stared at him. "You're telling me I'm trapped here?" "No," he said quickly. "Not trapped. But they're going to try to stop you." "How?" He hesitated. "You'll see." I felt my stomach twist. "Come on," Uncle Rick said, standing up. "Let's get you packed." I followed him upstairs, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to believe he was just being paranoid, but another part, the part that had seen those things, that had heard them calling to me, knew he was right. I wasn't just going to walk away from this place. They weren't going to let me. We spent the morning packing my things into a duffel bag. I try not to think about the fact that I had been here less than a week, but it felt like a lifetime. Uncle Rick double-checked the locks on all the doors before we headed outside. The sun was high in the sky, warm against my skin, but the woods surrounding the house still felt wrong, like they were holding their breath. My uncle drove an old Chevy pickup, rust creeping along the sides. He tossed my bag in the back, then looked at me. "Listen," he said, his voice serious. "No matter what happens, you don't stop. You don't look back. You just keep driving." I nodded, my hands sweating. He pulled open the driver's side door. "Let's go." I climbed into the passenger seat and buckled up, trying to ignore the way my heart was pounding in my chest. Then, as soon as Uncle Rick turned the key in the ignition,
Bang.
something slammed against the hood of the truck. I screamed. Uncle Rick cursed under his breath, his grip tightening on the wheel. Don't look, but I already had. A man was standing in front of the truck. At least he looked like a man. Tall, thin, with hollow eyes that seemed to sink into his face. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and he was grinning, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched too far. He lifted one hand and knocked on the hood again.
Bang.
"Rick," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Start the truck." Uncle Rick jammed his foot on the gas. The tires screeched against the gravel, and for a split second, I thought we were going to run the thing over. But as soon as we lurched forward, it wasn't there anymore. Just gone. Like it had never been there at all. I gasped, whipping my head around, scanning the woods, the road, the yard. Nothing. "They don't like it when people leave," Uncle Rick muttered under his breath. Then he hit the gas again and we tore out of the driveway. The road stretched out before us, empty and winding. Trees loomed on either side, their gnarled branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal hands. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then, just as we reached the old wooden bridge about 2 miles from the house, the radio crackled to life. It was pure static at first, sharp and grating, making my ears ring. I clapped my hands over them, wincing. Then, beneath the static, a voice.
Soft.
Familiar. "Sweetheart." My mom's voice came through the speakers. I felt my blood run cold. "No," I whispered.
It's okay, she said.
"You can come home now. Just pull over, baby." Uncle Rick slammed his fist against the radio, killing the sound instantly. "Don't listen," he said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "They're not real." My breathing was coming fast and shallow. My hands trembled in my lap. Then the truck jerked to the side. The steering wheel spun wildly in Uncle Rick's hands, like something had grabbed hold of it. The tires skidded against the road, gravel flying. For a moment, I thought we were going to crash. But just before we hit the guardrail, the truck stopped. I sucked in a shaky breath, my entire body shaking. Then I saw them, standing in the middle of the road ahead. Dozens of them, tall, thin figures, their faces blank, their heads tilted slightly, like they were listening, waiting. I clamped a hand over my mouth, a whimper escaping. "We can't go forward," I whispered. Uncle Rick let out a slow, measured breath. "No." I turned my head slowly to look out my window. My stomach dropped. They were on the sides of the road, too, standing in the trees, pressed between the trunks, peering out from the underbrush. We were surrounded. A chill ran down my spine. What do we do? Uncle Rick reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small, black revolver. I stared at it, my throat dry.
A gun?
Will that even work? He didn't answer. Instead, he opened the door. No. I grabbed his arm, panic rising in my chest. "Don't go out there." He pried my fingers away, his eyes dark and determined. "I'll distract them. You drive." I shook my head furiously. "No way. I can't just leave you." "You don't have a choice," he said. "They want me. They don't care about you." Tears burned my eyes. "That's not true." He gave me a sad smile. "Just go, kid." Then he stepped out onto the road, and the hollow ones moved. Every single one of them turned their heads toward him in unison. The movement was too smooth, too unnatural. Uncle Rick lifted the gun. "Come on, then." he muttered. Then he ran, straight into the trees. The hollow ones hesitated for only a split second. Then they followed, all of them. I watched in horror as they disappeared into the woods, chasing after my uncle like a pack of hungry wolves. And then I realized the road ahead was clear. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the wheel. I pressed my foot down on the gas, and I drove. I didn't stop driving. Not once. The road stretched out endlessly before me, the trees on either side rushing past in a blur. My hands were locked in a death grip on the steering wheel, my foot pressing the gas pedal so hard I thought it might snap. But my mind was still back there, back in the woods, back with Uncle Rick. They took him. I knew it. I could still see it in my mind. The way they had all turned in perfect unison, the way they had slithered after him. Too fast for something that walked on two legs. I hadn't seen what happened after he disappeared into the trees. I hadn't heard a gunshot. No screams. Just silence. Like the forest had swallowed him whole. I was crying now, but I didn't care. My body was on autopilot, my brain too full of static to do anything but drive, drive, drive. I didn't even know where I was going. Just away. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the road changed. The trees that had loomed like hungry shadows began to thin. The oppressive, suffocating darkness lifted. Sunlight streamed down, bright and golden, cutting through the eerie gloom. And then, I saw a gas station. Civilization. I slammed my foot on the brakes, the truck screeching to a stop in the station's gravel lot. For a moment, I just sat there, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps, my hands still shaking. Then, before my mind could even process it, I threw the door open and ran inside. The gas station was nearly empty, save for a bored-looking cashier leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly, a radio playing some old country song in the background. It was so normal, so painfully, impossibly normal. I stumbled toward the counter, my voice hoarse. "Help." The cashier blinked at me. You okay, dude?"
I shook my head. "Please."
I need to call someone. My uncle, my breath hitched. They took him. The cashier frowned. Took him? Who? I turned toward the windows, pointing back toward the road. The hollow ones, the things in the woods, but the road was empty. The trees in the distance looked normal, just a regular forest. No figures, no movement, no shadows shifting between the trunks, like nothing had ever been there at all. I stared, my pulse roaring in my ears.
No. No, no, no.
I didn't imagine it. I didn't. The cashier gave me a weird look. "You need me to call the cops or something?" I opened my mouth, then stopped. What would I even say? That shadow people took my uncle? That I had been trapped in a house surrounded by faceless things that whispered in the dark? They'd throw me in a psych ward. I sucked in a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "No," I murmured. I just need to call home." The cashier nodded and handed me the store's phone. My fingers fumbled over the buttons as I dialed my mom's number. She picked up on the third ring. "Hello." The sound of her voice nearly broke me. I choked out a sob, gripping the receiver so tightly my knuckles ached. "Mom," I whispered. A pause. Then, "Honey, is that you?" A fresh wave of relief washed over me. "Yeah," I breathed. "Yeah, it's me. I need you to come get me." "Of course, baby. Where are you?" I glanced around the gas station, my thoughts still foggy, my mind struggling to focus. I don't know. I'll ask." Then, just as I was about to turn back to the cashier, the line crackled, and my mom's voice changed. Her tone went flat, emotionless. "Honey, just come home." My stomach dropped. "We miss you." My entire body went stiff. My breath hitched in my throat, my fingers trembling against the phone. "Mom?" I whispered. No response, just static. Then, "We're waiting." Click. The call ended. A cold, horrible silence settled over me. I lowered the phone, my hands shaking. My head swam with nausea, my entire body filled with an unspeakable, crawling dread. Because I knew in my gut, that wasn't my mom. I turned toward the gas station windows again, heart pounding. The woods in the distance seemed closer. The shadows beneath the trees seemed deeper, like they were still watching, like they would always be watching. And I finally understood. You don't escape the hollow ones. You just run until they find you again. And when they do, they knock, and they wait for you to open the door. The end.